Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in epistemology. This lesson is going to be talking a bit more about the justified theory of true belief, which is the classical theory of knowledge. And we describe it as justified true belief, or JTB. And it is probably one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known, and definitely the most historically influential theories that are associated in epistemology. Essentially, as we noted from the previous lesson, the classical theory of knowledge asserts that for someone to know something, they must have specified three conditions. They must have met these three specific conditions. The first of these is belief, the second is truth, and the final is justification. Now, this is sometimes known as the tripartite theory of knowledge or the tripartite definition of knowledge. And this lesson, what we're going to do is discuss it in more detail. We will think about the classical theory, we'll think about the three conditions that need to be met in order for a belief to be held, in order for someone to have knowledge of a particular proposition. And we will talk about the conditions, like I said, specifically for the justified true belief theory. We'll think about the ways in which this theory actually operates in practice. We'll think about an example that illustrates this point before thinking about some of the strengths of this theory of knowledge, the ways in which we can actually apply it to modern examples of epistemology and theories of knowledge. And then what we will do in the next lesson is talk about some of the significant challenges that are thrown at this particular theory of knowledge, most famously done in 1963 by Edmund Gettier and the idea of Gettier of the Gettier problem, and we'll think about that in more detail in the next lesson. So, justified true belief is a theory of knowledge that is based on three key elements. Each of these key elements need to be satisfied in order for a person to be said to have knowledge. So the three conditions are, firstly, belief. A person must believe in the proposition or statement that is at hand. This is a foundational requirement for knowledge. If someone does not believe in something, then you cannot suggest that they have knowledge of that particular thing. And so in this regard, belief refers to not only saying that they believe something, but also just the mental acceptance or the conviction that a certain proposition is true. So if we take an example that I thought about in the previous video, if you believe the proposition, for example, that the sky is blue, that is a proposition, your belief is the starting point for having knowledge about the colour of the sky. And that's why you need to have belief first before you even think about the other requirements for the justified true belief theory of knowledge. Now, belief is important because if someone does not hold a belief in a particular proposition, then it cannot be said that they actually know that proposition. They don't believe it, no matter how true the proposition is. Knowledge, therefore, requires that the subject, the person who is engaging with the knowledge, does in fact have an active engagement with the proposition that they are claiming to have knowledge about. With this being said, then, in order for a person to have a belief in a knowledge on account of the justified true belief theory of knowledge, then it must also be the case that that belief, that proposition is true. A person cannot know something that is false, even if they strongly believe that it is the case. They strongly believe that it is true. If it is false, then they cannot have knowledge of it, even if they even have potentially good justifications for it. And this means that, in other words, that essentially the proposition or statement in question not only has to be something that the person believes in, but it must also be something that corresponds to the way the world actually is. You might believe, for example, that the sky is green. Well, it doesn't matter how much you believe it. You might even have justification for believing it. Let's say for your entire life you've been wearing glasses that have a green lens. Well, you have a belief in something. It might even be a deeply held and sincere belief. You might also have justification for why you believe it, because you're wearing glasses that have a particular lens. But if it doesn't correspond to something that actually is the case about the world, then it still can still nevertheless not be knowledge of a particular thing. And that brings us to an issue in the context of justified true belief that is cited here on screen, known as the correspondence theory of truth. Now, according to the correspondence theory of truth, the idea of truth is generally understood in terms of the idea that a belief is true if it matches or if it corresponds to facts or reality. So, for example, the belief that, quote, water boils at 100 degrees C at sea level is true because it corresponds to an objective fact about the world. I can go out and I can then test this empirically, and I can see that that is the case. And so the truth condition of the justified true belief theory ensures that knowledge reflects reality. So, one of the things that is important to remember is that knowledge of a thing that is false is probably on this account not considered knowledge at all. We could all have knowledge and beliefs in things that are not true, and so truth really grounds this theory of knowledge to reality, and it sort of attaches the theory of knowledge to reality because it requires that the knowledge, for something to even be knowledge, for a person to even have knowledge of something, that must reflect reality in some way. It acts as a safeguard against false beliefs, which would therefore undermine the claim to knowledge itself. And then finally, there is justification. The belief must be justified. That is, there must be a good reason, or reasons, plural, for holding the belief that you hold. Having a belief in a particular proposition can only be having knowledge of that proposition if you have a justification, if you have a good foundation of logic and rationality that actually allows you to come to a conclusion that allows you to believe in that thing. To have knowledge or to believe something simply because of luck or coincidence or out of pure random fact does not count as knowledge. If, for example, I have a policy in my brain where every third proposition I'm going to sincerely and deeply believe, just out of just a general policy of every third proposition that I come across, I'm going to believe it, even if in some cases the proposition I choose to believe is true, that is not a valid justification for why I believe that particular thing. A more valid justification might be empirical evidence, i.e., if we take the example of seeing of the sky being blue, seeing a blue sky, that is empirical evidence of that particular proposition. Or it could be logical inference, such as mathematical reasoning, understanding, for example, that 2 + 2 is 4 can be determined mathematically. Or even testimonial evidence. Let's say someone who you really trust tells you that the sky is blue, and so that you're inclined to believe their testimony of that particular proposition. The justification must support the belief in such a way that a reasonable person would accept it as being valid. And so justification is a condition that is crucial because what it does is it distinguishes knowledge from mere true belief. Just because you believe something and that thing happens to be true doesn't mean you have knowledge of that thing, because you might not have a justification, a reason for being able to come to a conclusion that that proposition is true. You might just, as I said, accidentally stumbled into the correct answer, or through sheer luck or coincidence come to the conclusion that is actually correct. That doesn't count as knowledge on account of the classical theory of knowledge. Let's take an illustration to show you with an example. Suppose that a person believes that the Eiffel Tower is located in Paris. Now, we should know at least intuitively that this is true because we are brought up to know that the Eiffel Tower is indeed in Paris. Moreover, let's say that this individual has justification for her belief. Let's say that she has read about the Eiffel Tower in geography books, and says she has seen images of it, and she has seen images associated with the map of Paris, and heard people talking about it. Well, on the account of the justified true belief, we have a proposition The proposition is that the Eiffel Tower is located in Paris. We have a belief in that proposition. The person in question does in fact believe it. The proposition is true, which responds to and corresponds to the second condition, and she has a clear justification for why she believes it to be true. She's read about it in geography books. She has seen images of it. She's heard people talking about it. And so, on account of this theory of knowledge, the individual in question who we're talking about knows that the Eiffel Tower is in Paris. So with all that in mind, what are the advantages of having a theory of this nature? Let's actually do a bit of philosophy and think about it in a bit more of an analytical sense. Well, this classical theory of knowledge does have several advantages. It's particularly clear and it's particularly simple. It's a very straightforward way that we can define knowledge, which makes it a very useful tool for how we can come to understand and how we can come to know certain things. It has a clear structure. 3 conditions, belief, truth, and justification, offer a simple and intuitive structure for how somebody can analyze and come to conclusions about their understanding of knowledge. The theory is easy to understand and is very easy to apply in different contexts, a very intuitive structure. There is an emphasis on truth in the classical theory of knowledge. Not all theories of knowledge that explain the nature of knowledge place such a heavy emphasis on truth as being an important condition. Because in this case, however, we can see that it is important because it ensures that knowledge aligns with reality. Truth is about essentially aligning knowledge or aligning propositions with reality, not just with subjective or even mistaken beliefs. This is important and increasingly important in a world in which things like mis and disinformation are rampant on places like social media. And so the correspondence theory of truth and the justified true belief theory tells us and ensures that what we claim to know is in fact accurate. It is able to distinguish knowledge from mere belief. The justification condition helps us to distinguish knowledge from mere belief, and so too does the truth condition. The fact that the justified truth belief theory only has as one of the 3 conditions belief in a particular proposition suggests that it is something that can be distinguished from just having a belief in a particular thing. It prevents people from claiming that they know things that they believe to be true without having solid grounds and solid foundations for why they come to that belief, for the justification in that belief. And then finally, we have the fact that it is a versatile system. It applies to a broad range of knowledge claims. We can say, for example, everyday knowledge, like the fact that I know my own name. I can justify that and I can understand that I have knowledge of that through this particular theory. Or even scientific knowledge. We already know that we can apply this to scientific knowledge when we use the example of water boiling at 100 degrees C at sea level. The conditions can be adapted and they can be nuanced to suit different domains of inquiry. So this is a particularly strong example of a theory of knowledge and a way in which we can sort of think about knowledge in more detail. Now, there are criticisms of this particular theory of knowledge. The main criticism is, of course, the Gettier problem. And we will get to the Gettier problem in the next lesson when we look at Gettier cases and think about how they work and provide some examples. But we will also think about some of the philosophical responses to the Gettier problem that put the classical theory of knowledge back on the map as being particularly foundational and having some kind of influence. So all of that in the next lesson.